An ivory envelope slid through my brass mailbox the same week the humidity wrapped Palm Beach like a wet towel. Cassian Holt, 54. Internal controller, 3 years since I last set foot in the villa I still partly own. The brass key felt cool in my palm, its edges smooth from decades of use. What would you do if the door it opened led straight into old grudges? The envelope waited in my brass mailbox like a swan that knew it was being watched. Heavy cream, the kind of paper you buy to make a point. My name, Cassian Holt, slanted across it in strokes. I recognized Marceline's practiced hand, the loops confident, the pressure hard enough to leave ridges. When I slid it open with the old pocket knife I keep on a hook by the door, Jasmine rose from the slit, her perfume expensive and faintly imperial, as if the scent itself expected to be obeyed. Inside, it's been too long, underlined twice. Family is gathering at the villa on Saturday. We'd love to have you. The plural did the heavy lifting. She'd always been good at conscripting ghosts. I stood in the doorway and let the air conditioning comb a line of cool along my forearms. Late summer light poured through the sliders, breaking on the intracoastal in coins of glare. Somewhere below, a boat engine coughed to life. A gull answered as if filing a complaint. On the console table lay a valet claim ticket I hadn't thrown away. Pink paper gone to salmon edges, softened by time, a cartoon palm tree leaning at a jaunty angle. Voss stamped in block letters, a number half smudged by sunscreen. I didn't know why I'd kept it. Souvenirs of discomfort have a way of becoming exhibits, but there it was, an artifact from the last time I'd stood under the portico of that villa, pretending we were all still on speaking terms. I took the note to the balcony. From up here, I can see the waterway bend, the flat roofs, the clipped hedges that try to look effortless. In Palm Beach, a handwritten invitation doesn't mean sentiment. It means strategy. Charity Gala board maneuver, a seating chart that decides the next quarter. Those are the usual translations. Family on stationery like this reads like a contract with friendly punctuation. The safe in my bedroom gave its habitual sigh when I spun the dial. Behind the neatly stacked tax folders and a cigar box I never filled sat a small leather wallet that holds the things I don't like to remember I own. I opened it and slipped out the key. Brass dents the bow nicked where my brother once dropped it on the marble and pretended not to care. I rubbed a thumb over its worn teeth and felt the faint burrs where time had filed its own opinion. The first time Rudrick handed me that key, he did it with both hands, stagey as ever. "It's ours," he said, and stretched the word until it hummed. He had a way of making possessions sound like generosity. Back in the kitchen, I poured coffee I didn't need into a mug I probably should have replaced. Steam braided upward, then unraveled. I set the key down beside the cup and watched a crescent of condensation form and begin its slow march. In another life, that would be nothing a ring on a table, yet here I was counting seconds, as if moisture could keep time with doubt. The circle grew, edged the metal, then touched it. I didn't move it away. Decisions like to feel inevitable, give them a ritual, and they'll oblige. I read the card again. "We'd love to have you." She had underlined the love so emphatically, the pen dug a trench at the tail of the E. Her handwriting always did what her voice did. Suggest closeness, insist on control. Old money airs new money problems. Palm Beach will forgive almost anything if you pay the HOA and send flowers. If you don't, it will forgive nothing but smile while it refuses. I took the invitation to the desk and slipped it into a drawer I pretend is for correspondence. The valet ticket I slid into my wallet seat filler for a courage I wasn't entirely sure I still had. The key I left by the cup. I leaned on the balcony rail and watched a pair of pelicans stitch the air wing beats slow and exact. When you've worked long enough with ledgers, you begin to understand that numbers aren't the only things that balance. Debts favors words, all of them come due. The phone lay face down, screen black, like a pond at dusk. I turned it over and scrolled for a number I hadn't dialed since the last holiday card went unanswered. The line picked up on the second ring. Villa office, Elowen speaking. "Hi, Elowen, it's Cassian." A pause not long but measurable, like the breath you take before lifting something fragile. "Mr. Holt," she said, and then softened, the formality slipping. "Hello, I received an invitation," I said. "From Marceline, Saturday. A family gathering. Another pause, a faint clink as if a spoon touched porcelain somewhere near her. Yes, she said carefully, we're hosting. Am I on the list? Not yet, she said evenly. A professional never lets you hear a wince. But that's easily fixed. Should I come on her end? Air moved through a vent. I could almost hear the villa, the shaded halls, the hush that money buys to make itself comfortable. If you want my honest answer, she said yes. Then after a beat that felt like a decision falling into place, you should come. I let the silence sit a moment, tasting it. Timing valet begins at 6. Use the main gate. The west scanner's been temperamental. Garden entrance for guests. If you need a quiet place, the office is... She stopped. We'll make it work. Thank you, Aloan. That's my job, she said, which is what people say when they mean I'll do more than that. But please don't make me say it on a recorded line. We hung up. The apartment felt different, not quieter exactly, but aligned as if furniture had moved a fraction, and the room admitted it. I sat again and watched the coffee cool. The condensation had claimed the key. A tiny bead clung to the edge and trembled, catching the afternoon light. I pressed a fingertip to it, and the bead split left a small clean spot that dried to nothing almost at once. I carried the key to the safe, hesitated, and brought it back. Some items belong in safes. Others need to be visible so you can't pretend they're not yours. I set it down next to the note next to the cut of jasmine that had faded to a thought. The intracoastal went on glittering the way money glitters when it's far enough away to look like water. Saturday, I said to the room, and the room being a room offered no opinion. I pocketed the brass, felt its weight settle like a small fact, and looked out over the rail as a skiff drew a thin white line into the distance that broke and didn't matter and still somehow stayed. The wrought iron gates parted like a stage curtain hinges, sighing as the valet attendant squinted at his tablet. He ran a finger down the list, then back up, then glanced at me over the edge of a polite smile. Name, he said, though he already had it. When I gave it, his thumb hovered, then tapped. A green check bloomed. Welcome, Mr. Holt. The hesitation stuck in the air like lint. The drive wound past clipped hedges and a row of travelers' palms, lit from below their shadows, making ribs on the lawn. By the time I reached the portico, the sky had turned that bruised peach Florida gives you just before dark. String lights stitched from palm to palm, and the pool had begun to hold the evening like a second sky. Someone laughed, the too loud laugh of a person keeping time for the room. Marceline waited at the top of the steps in coral silk, a color daring the sunset to try harder. Her smile arrived before I did. Cassian, she called, and the garden turned its face. Everyone, this is Cassian, our most reliable pair of hands around the place. She said it lightly, but she placed the words where they'd be heard. A couple near the oyster bar let out a small synchronized chuckle. A man in a blazer the color of fresh money leaned in and asked, half confiding. Back on staff, then I turned to him with the blandest version of my face. Just back, I said. Champagne moved through the crowd like a rumor. Trays floated past with tuna canapes and tiny crab cakes wearing lemon-like hats. Elowen skimmed the perimeter, the walk of someone solving 3 problems ahead of the first one. When our eyes met, hers flicked here, then gone, profession carved over concern. She adjusted a votive by an inch, which fixed nothing but felt like doing something. Near the pool, on a low teak table between a bowl of limes and a glossy yacht magazine, a piece of paper stuck out at an angle, Homeowners Association delinquency notice. The corner was creased as if someone had tried to fold the message down. I didn't touch it. Money trouble dresses well in this town. It just doesn't always pay the bill. Drink. Marceline pressed a flute into my hand without waiting for the answer. Up close, her perfume had the same quiet insistence as her handwriting. To family, she said, and lifted her glass. We clinked. Before I could sip, she was already turning her face toward the quartet, and a couple approaching with the hunger of people who collect names. I let the crowd carry me toward the kitchen, the one room at parties where truth occasionally puts its feet up. The stainless counters were bright enough to be polite. A line cook torched the tops of meringue tartlets, and the sweet scorch made a ribbon through the air. On the corkboard by the pantry door, between a pest control flyer and a delivery schedule, a recipe card hung on a pin. My wife's hand looped small, steady key lime pie. Rudrick's favorite, written in green ink that had begun to fade. I put a finger to the edge and didn't take it down. The card had grease freckles and a water ripple at one corner, evidence of good work. For a moment the room narrowed to the card and the little tremor it made in me. There are ways to honor the dead that don't look like grief from a distance, a scholarship perhaps. With her name stitched into a future that needs it. The thought arrived and sat patient as a recipe. On my way back out, a server brushed past with a tray of flutes beads of cold traveling the stems. The quartet slid from standards into something vaguely French and completely expensive. A woman in a white sheath asked me whether the guest house roof had finally been repaired. I told her I'd let facilities know she cared. She laughed as if we were sharing a joke about the help, which in a way we were. Marceline found me by the hedge, her coral silk now catching the garden lights like embers. "You see," she said, eyes bright, surveying the room. "Everything in its place." Almost, I said. She tipped her head, amused as if I'd complimented her on the weather. "You always did have a way of sounding like a ledger," she said. She touched my sleeve, precise, proprietary, and lifted her glass for a second toast, quieter this time, aimed so only nearby ears could catch it. "To keeping the house in order." Our glasses grazed. When crystal meets crystal, there's a note that pretends to be gentle. We held the contact a fraction too long, and in that fraction she looked not at me, but through me, past me, toward the far terrace, where the last light bled out of the sky. From the edge of the garden, beyond the potted citrus and the line of lanterns, the terrace ran toward the sea in a plain of stone. There, half in shadow, Marceline stood with a man in a navy suit that fit him like an idea. He did not have a drink. His posture said courtroom, not cocktail. His shoes declined to no grass. He kept his hands together as if holding a file he couldn't put down. When she spoke, he didn't laugh. He nodded once, the sort of nod a person gives a plan he has already priced. I stepped deeper into the hedge's perfume. Under the sweet was the green bite of sap, a reminder that even well-managed things have a wildness if you look close. Elowen drifted past with a tray, and without turning her head, murmured, "Breathe." Then she was gone, and I was left with the music. The clink of glass on glass, the hush that lives underneath performance. I took a slow lap of the room's study salon, the hallway where Rudrick used to keep a ridiculous bronze heron. Changes were small and therefore loud new art, with the kind of confidence that comes from a gallery's assurances, not from taste. A missing rug, a fresh paint line that didn't quite kiss the molding. My mind made its quiet inventory, what remained, what shifted, what the shifts cost. Back outside, the breeze had picked up just enough to move the lantern flames. The man in navy stood with his back to me now, broad and patient as a door you weren't invited to open. Marceline turned her head, and the garden lights put small coins in her eyes. She smiled again, the public one, then let it fall, the way a magician lets you see the hand that isn't moving. I raised my glass toward her from across the grass, a question posed in champagne, and she returned the gesture, a punctuation mark, on a sentence she had already written. I took a sip. The bubbles were fine, the sort that whisper more than they speak. Behind me, the pool filter hummed steady, unbothered. Ahead on the terrace, the conversation tilted, and the navy suit glanced down at something I couldn't see, as if there were papers where parties usually put plates. I stood where the string lights thinned and watched the distance between us organize itself into rolls. Morning light glazed the dashboard as I pulled onto olive, the sun laying a bright stripe across the faded Palm Shore Club wristband looped over my rearview mirror. The paper was brittle now, salt-stung and sun-bitten, the date a ghosted stamp. I hadn't worn it since the last time Rudrick and I drifted off the beach walkway to eat sloppy fish tacos and plan futures neither of us could afford. I touched it with 2 fingers, the way you touch a good luck charm you don't believe in anymore, then let it swing. Alaric Dane's office occupied a corner of a low-slung building that tried with wood paneling and brass letters to be older than it was. The reception smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. A young assistant in a navy dress asked my name, then lifted a finger and disappeared. Moments later, Alaric filled the doorway, tall, lean. His silver hair combed with the same care he gave to Klaus's. "Cassian," he said. Half smile, half inventory. "You look like a man who's read an invitation twice." "In that case, I need your eyes," I said. His office was what people mean when they say old Florida paneled walnut, a pair of club chairs that had learned patience walls lined with regatta photos in black frames. In one, a spinnaker swelled like a lung, in another, a spray of water froze in mid-slap. He gestured me into a chair and waited hand-steepled until I set the leather folder on the desk and slid out my copy of the deed. He didn't pick it up. He drew it closer with 2 fingers, then let his index finger travel the page, as if reading Braille. When it reached the clause that names me a 1/3 owner, he paused. There he murmured, and the nail tapped the paper once. Still ink, still enforceable. Marceline sent for me, I said. Villa party, family. I let the word sit between us like a damp towel. He reached for a notebook, uncapped a fountain pen with a small click, and wrote Marceline contact in his neat, unhurried hand. She's been juggling, he said. Not well. Late HOA payments. A quiet listing in Jupiter, she tried to run through a trust. Rumors of a bridge loan that isn't bridging. He glanced up. She'll try to sell what can be sold. Sometimes that includes people. I felt the small familiar tightening in my jaw that numbers used to give me when they didn't add. What protects me, the deed, your capacity, and your timing, he said. Don't challenge the performance. Let it play. You sit in the orchestra pit and count bars. He shifted the deed a fraction so it squared with the legal pad. He was a man who hated crooked paper. My phone buzzed face down. I started to let it go, then saw Elowen on the screen and answered. Her voice came low as if her words might fog glass. Cass, she's planning something for Friday. There are papers on her desk marked escrow, a calendar printout with closing in red. I shouldn't be telling you this. You didn't, I said. You were reminding me to bring an umbrella. Umbrellas are useful, she said, and the line clicked off. I relayed it to Alaric, who nodded once as if confirming weather. Escrow implies intent, and a buyer with nerves, he said. We can put a hand on that pipeline very quickly if we must, but not yet. He leaned back, steepled fingers returning to the pose. Stay silent. Let her think you're just background until we're ready. The words were soft enough to be mistaken for kindness. The advice was anything but. He flipped the deed closed and pushed it toward me. You brought your ID. I raised an eyebrow. He smiled. Good. We'll need copies when we file for a temporary restraining order on any transfer. If she pushes, we push harder. If she tries incapacity, we invite evaluation. But the first move is hers. What about the party go, he said. Listen more than you talk. Touch nothing, sign nothing, drink sparingly. If someone hands you a pen, hand it back with a napkin. Sound legal doctrine, I said. He allowed himself a small dry chuckle. It's kept more estates intact than courage has. We stood. He escorted me to the door, and I shook his hand palm to palm, the way men do when they want to promise without saying they are promising. In the lobby, the lemon oil smelled sharper. Outside, the heat met me square and unembarrassed. Across Olive, a sedan idled at the curb, a navy-suited man leaning against the passenger door, as if balance were a thing he could purchase. The cut of the suit was exact. The shoes were courtroom black, their shine a decision. Marceline came out of a boutique with a flat white bag, and that careful smile she saves for people with clipboards. She touched the man's sleeve, said something brief, the tilt of her chin said, confident. The set of his mouth said already agreed and slid into the back seat. He rounded the hood and took the wheel himself. I stood in the oven heat and watched the car merge into traffic, the wristband on my mirror flashing in my mind, like a signal I hadn't learned to read. The wind picked up from the east, and the flag over the bank across the street snapped once hard, then held. Marceline's text arrived at noon, all bright punctuation and a varnished tone that didn't quite hide the grain beneath family meeting at 5 in the Grand Salon. Attendance appreciated truly. Appreciated like tips, like silence. By 4:50, I was on the marble, the villa smelling faintly of lemon polish and the kind of flowers that come arranged with cards. The Grand Salon had been staged, as if a magazine spread had wandered in and made itself at home. Sofas in a soft horseshoe, a low coffee table set with tulips, a silver tray glinting like good intentions. My chair sat a half pace outside the arc. A quiet geometry lesson, inclusion adjacent to exclusion. On the table in front of where they'd placed me stood a bottle of my favorite mineral water label, turned just so, condensation beating on unbroken glass. A host's gesture or a reminder you will not be the one to open anything here. Above us, Rudrick's portrait held its practiced gaze, the painter having captured that familiar half-smile he wore when he wanted two different things at the same time. The ceiling's coffers caught the light and returned it politely. Marceline swept in with a low Russell coral today traded for winter white that made the room work harder. Behind her, the young man from the party navy suit that fit like a phrase you don't argue with carried a slim leather portfolio and the air of someone who makes his living by defining words. Two second cousins I hadn't seen since a graduation appeared as if summoned by etiquette itself and took their places at the curve's safe center. Elowen hovered at the door and then, reading the weather, disappeared. "Thank you for coming," Marceline said, seating herself at the head of the horseshoe and letting the silence perform its duty. "This house means everything to our family, and with all the moving parts these days, I thought it best to sit down together, purely practical." She smiled in the way white paint smiles, covering bright, obliterating detail. The lawyer crossed one knee neatly and clicked a pen without writing. "Ms. Voss has asked me to attend to keep the discussion clear," he said. His voice had the courtroom's studied kindness. "Clarity is a gift." "I'm fond of clarity," I said. "It doesn't spoil in the sun. We'll keep this brief." Marceline went on, tilting her head as if brevity were mercy. "Cassian, I've noticed a few, shall we say, lapses. Misplacing things, missing calls, repeating questions we've already covered. Perfectly normal at our age. A gracious sweep that excluded her without looking like it but worrying when there are serious responsibilities attached. For everyone's peace of mind, I think it would be sensible to simplify. Consolidate, delegate. Consolidate who's to whom, I asked. She let a soft laugh escape, the kind people use when they want the room to laugh with them, but also at you. "Don't be prickly, dear. You know how much I value your steadiness." Which is precisely why, and here her hand came forward, palm up, a beggar's grace. "It might be best if I held the key for now, only while we sort the paperwork, to keep us from tripping over each other." The mineral water cooled the table under its own patience. I could feel the villa key in my pocket, familiar as a coin I'd carried through too many laundries. I took it out, and for a second it warmed in my palm. Brass, catching the late light in a shallow, forgiving way. The bow's flattened edge showed a hairline crease, old, almost decorative, unless you'd made it yourself years ago, dropping the thing on stone and deciding that meant nothing. I set the key on the tulip-polished wood gently, the way you set down a statement you intend to stand by. The cousins flicked their eyes at it and back again, as if watching something live that they preferred to remember later as rumor. The lawyer's pen made another uncommitted click. Marceline's smile widened by a small, involuntary increment as her fingers reached and then curled over the brass, as if testing whether it would resist being held. There she said softly, satisfaction pressed flat into the word, "So much better." The room shifted imperceptibly into a new alignment. She glanced at the young man who produced a manila envelope from the leather portfolio with the calm of a magician retrieving a dove. He slid it across the table, stopping just shy of her lacquered nails. Bold black letters along the edge announced themselves without apology. "Petition of incapacity." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The envelope did the talking, its tab jutting like a tooth. In the portrait's frame, Rudrick kept his half-smile. I heard the compressor on the far AC intake engage a low hum, the villa taking a breath it would hold as long as necessary. Marceline angled the envelope so that the cousins could see the label without seeing the paperwork. "I'm sure you understand," she said, and the phrase approached me the way weather approaches a coast. "We all want what's best. It's just a safety net. Nothing to worry about if there's nothing to worry about." The lawyer looked pleased in the small, economical way of men who charge by the quarter hour. "The court appreciates proactive families," he said. "It reduces confusion." I let their words settle and go inert. I have found that silence handled correctly will tell you more than questions. My chair, half-step out of the circle, held me at the precise distance where voices sound honest by accident. I reached for the mineral water, turned the bottle so the label faced me. Habit alignment, a way of taking measure, and did not break the seal. Clarity, I said at last. Returning my gaze to Marceline is indeed a gift. I let my eyes touch the key beneath her hand, the pale crescent where metal had met marble years ago, written into it like a footnote. Then I looked up and our eyes met on a flat plane. Be careful, I said, even calm, the tone I use when reconciling accounts in a room that doesn't want to reconcile. Be careful what you think you own. The bank alert lit my screen like a flare. Scheduled transfer, $500, $1,000, 9:30 a.m. Friday. For a second, I thought it was a phishing attempt. Then I saw the originating account string and felt the small, precise click of dread that only numbers can deliver. A new window shouldered its way in front. Escrow closing, Friday. A calendar invite forwarded by Marceline's assistant, polite as a waiter setting down the wrong plate. I closed my laptop as if that could stop the clock and drove to the financial district, the glass boxes shining like ice. In the lobby, a carafe of water sat with lemon wheels bobbing the faint citrus, turning the air into something that wanted to pass for hospitality. From the mezzanine, I could see masts in the marina, white lines against the blue, each boat reflecting in the bank's skin as if property could float. A manager in a charcoal suit met me with a practiced smile that said, both yes and not yet. We sat in a room with too much daylight and a single fern that had been kept alive out of policy. I put the deed copy on the table, then my ID, then a thin folder that has waited too long for this errand. 1/3 owner, I said, tapping the line. No transfer without unanimous consent. He read the clause lips, moving a fraction, then glanced at the clock, 9:07. Let me get our compliance officer. Put me on speaker, Alaric said when I called. His voice filled the room with the kind of calm that makes other people reach for pens. We are seeking an immediate administrative hold on any outgoing wires tied to the Villa account and any escrow accounts attached by trust or operating agreement. The transfer is unauthorized as to Mr. Holt's share. He is present with identification and the recorded deed. The manager angled the phone so it could hear him nod. He typed the keys, making the same small sound. Keyboards always make when people are trying to be gentle with urgency. I see an instruction queued for 9:30, he said, eyes on the monitor. Destination, a settlement company in Jupiter. Memo reads, Close Villa. Freeze the originating account, Alaric said. Document Mr. Holt's objection and my credentialing. I'll email the TRO draft in 5 minutes. Counsel, the manager said, softening. We can place a temporary hold pending internal review. But You'll need exactly what you're getting, Alaric said, and there was the thinnest thread of dry amusement in it. A contemporaneous record that your client alerted you before the wire executed. My phone buzzed. Elowin, a photo snapped at an angle the corner of Marceline's desk. HOA delinquency letter under a manila folder labeled escrow. A bottle of champagne already open, a single flute catching the window light. She's toasting early, her text read. Another message followed, calendar printout on her blotter, closing Fry 9:30. I slid the phone across to the manager. He studied the image like it might confess. 9:19. The marina's masts made white scratches in the window's reflection. Someone in the hallway laughed too loudly, then remembered where they were. Mr. Holt, the manager said, posture changing almost imperceptibly, as if a lever had been moved inside him. I am placing a hold. He turned the screen so I could watch the cursor. One click, a confirmation window, another click. He exhaled through his nose. Outgoing transfer canceled. Funds locked pending review. On speaker, Alaric didn't say good job or excellent. He simply said, timestamp that. Then to me, now we formalize. I'll file the motion for injunctive relief this afternoon. If she claims you're incapable, we welcome evaluation. The fern looked healthier in that moment. The citrus in the lobby smelled sharper, as if the lemon had learned a new word. I signed the bank's form acknowledgement of hold. Notice of dispute, my hand steady, in a way it hadn't been for days. The manager printed 2 copies, slid them in front of me with a felt tip for signatures, and gathered them back like a dealer who prefers the game slow. He stood, offered his hand. Mr. Holt, we appreciate clients who believe in clarity. Clarity doesn't bounce, I said. In the hallway, the carpet had that muted luxury that forgives footsteps. I stopped at the glass rail and looked through my own reflection at the marina lines. Tidy hulls nudging the water, behaving as if money hadn't tried to use it. My phone buzzed again. Elowin. She just got a call, not smiling now. I called Alaric back from the elevator bank. Watched the numbers climb and fall behind the chrome. She'll pivot, she'll claim capacity issues. Family concern, best intentions, he said. Which is why we do the opposite of refusal. We invite the test. On my terms, I said. Exactly, he replied. You pick the clinic, you pick the day. I'll be in the waiting room pretending to read about boats. I pressed the phone to my chest for a breath, felt the thrum line up with the old quiet rhythm that lives behind anger. The lobby doors whooshed open and hot sun reached in. Outside sails tilted, corrected, and kept going. I slid the phone into my pocket and said to the reflection in the glass, not quite aloud, "It's time." Then to Alaric before the doors broke the air again, "Schedule it. Let's have my capacity tested on my terms." The brass letters on the desk caught the morning light. Dr. Beatrice Connell, Forensic Evaluations. As if to remind me exactly where I was and why. The clinic smelled faintly of lemon polish over the salt from the nearby inlet. The seafoam walls steady against the heat outside. Behind me, Alaric sat in the corner with a legal pad he wasn't writing on his gaze. Patient and unreadable. On the wall to my right, a paper calendar hung by a brass tack. Next week's square glared in red ink villa hearing. I let my eyes rest on it just long enough to register, then turned back to the panel. 3 evaluators in quiet suits. Neurology, psychology, geriatrics. They introduced themselves and turned their voices a mix of precision and courtesy. "Let's start simple," Dr. Connell said, clipboard poised. "Orientation date, location, and purpose of today's visit." I gave the full date, the street address, and without lifting my eyes said, "To demonstrate that my capacity meets or exceeds the standard required to manage my 1/3 interest in the Palm Beach villa." Her pen scratched once a neat checkmark. They moved through the battery word list serial 7's shapes to replicate. I threaded in details where I could, reciting HOA fees from last quarter, the exact year Rudrick started the key lime pie ritual, the square footage of the villa, and its assessed value in 2019. The psychologist's mouth twitched once as if debating a smile. The neurologist leaned forward. "Recall this sequence in order: valet ticket, meeting document, action." I didn't pause. Valet ticket handed to me at the villa 3 years ago, meeting with Alaric to review the co-ownership deed, escrow document on Marceline's desk, bank freeze executed at 9:21 a.m. last Friday. He glanced sideways at Dr. Connell, who was already noting something. The geriatric specialist closed his notebook. "Now calculations quick in your head." I worked through them aloud, steady, no faster than necessary. My hands stayed folded, the weight of my watch grounding me. From the corner, Alaric gave the smallest nod. I let my breath out slowly, matching the clinic's clock tick-tick, each one measured. At last, Dr. Connell set her pen down. "Mr. Holt," she said with the faintest tilt of a smile, "you're more organized than most executives I see." Before I could answer, Alaric's phone buzzed against his knee. He glanced at the screen, then at me. "Judge just ruled," he said quietly. "Forced sale approved, but your shares protected." The wall clock kept on indifferent, while the red circle on next week's calendar seemed somehow a little less loud. The court officer set the key in my palm, as if returning a watch found under a hotel chair. "For the record," he said, and his pen made a small line on a carbon form. The brass felt heavier than it used to cool from his pocket, the bow showing a thin crescent, where a jeweler's weld ran like a healed seam. I thanked him and stepped into the foyer. The villa had been staged within an inch of its life. Hydrangeas the color of good intentions, a throw folded to the angle favored by magazines, bowls of limes that would never be sliced. The air carried no trace of sleep or coffee or laughter. Only lemon polish and the faint iodine of the ocean drifting through the opened French doors. Past the doors, the Atlantic breathed evenly, a sound older than deeds. Alaric stood near the console with a slim briefcase, his expression the neutral courtesy of a man who lets the paperwork speak. The buyer's representative, a woman with sensible heels and a notebook that seemed to know more than most people, smiled in a way that refused to be mistaken for warmth. Elowen hovered just past the threshold of the office, hair tied back a pencil behind one ear. She caught my eye and then looked away, as if to grant privacy neither of us owned. Marceline came down the stairs, as though the audience had already applauded. Today's dress was the color of paper that costs more than news. Her mouth set in a shape meant for graciousness and failing. Satisfied, she asked before hello. After all these years, you finally found a way to humiliate me. I turned to the key in my hand, the weld catching a scrap of light, then rested my palm on the console where she could see it. No, I said. I found a way to stop you from humiliating yourself in public records. I kept my voice level and slow, the way you lower a lid on a boiling pot. Jupiter listing through a trust that doesn't meet its own bylaws. The bridge loan from a lender who doesn't like bridges only tolls. HOA notices you revised with a photocopier that forgot the timestamp. You called them drafts. The association calls them forgery. Color climbed her throat and then thought better of it. You've always been accounting. Order isn't a personality flaw, I said, especially when houses fall on people who live in them. The buyer's rep cleared her throat in a small, decisive key. We're ready when you are. Alaric opened the briefcase. The latches snapped like small verdicts. Paper slid onto the console, a choreography of signatures and initials. The rep narrated where to sign. I signed. Alaric turned pages with the care of a man aligning lives. Outside, a gull sailed past and let out a single conversational cry, as if to note attendance. When it came time, I stepped to the buyer and held out the key, brass polished to a serviceable shine. The faint weld line, no more than a reminder. The buyer's hand was steady. She accepted it the way surgeons accept instruments, without ceremony and with respect. Funds will disperse per the order, she said, and the rep's pen made a final comfortable scratch. Alaric checked his watch and gave the smallest nod. Somewhere behind us, a printer in the office began to hum receipts. Confirmations, acknowledgments, the witness choir of modern transfer. Elowen exhaled. In the stairwell, the echo of air moving made a hush that wasn't silence. Marceline stared at the empty space, where the key had been, as if I had taken the last anchor from a boat she didn't know was already drifting. You could have come to me, she said, not quite managing the edge she wanted. We did come to you, I said. 3 years of invitations you didn't return, calls you didn't take notices, you tucked under magazines. This is just the part with paper. The buyer shook Alaric's hand, then mine, and walked toward the doors. Heels confident against the marble. Wind pressed the curtains inward, brought a taste of salt and a rumor of spray, then retreated. The rep gathered the sign stack and clicked her pen closed like a lid. We walked to the threshold. The ocean's light lay across the floor in thin bars, as if someone had drawn new lines with a ruler. I stepped into the white heat of the portico. The air smelled of sun-warmed stone and the faint sweetness of cut citrus from a neighbor's tree. The car waited at the drive's bend engine, ticking softly. Behind me, in the cool of the foyer, Marceline's shoes hesitated. Cass, she said, my name softened at the edges in a way I hadn't heard since before grief learned our address. I paused 1 foot in shadow, 1 in the glare, the breeze tugging at my jacket, like a child who hadn't learned the difference between need and want. A month later, the ballroom at the Palm Beach Grand Hotel glowed in gold, uplighting the kind that softened edges and made even strangers look like old friends. Linen-draped tables fanned out in a half-moon from the small stage, their centerpieces gardenias in low crystal bowls, breathing sweetness into the air. From the wings, I could see Alaric at a table near the front, his jacket folded neatly over the chair back, and Elowen beside him, her hair catching the light when she leaned to speak to someone. In my breast pocket, an envelope weighted its paper warm from my jacket. My name written in a hand I hadn't seen in years, Julienne's. I left it sealed for now. Tonight had its own order. When the MC called my name, I walked to the lectern, the murmur of conversation drawing down to a hush. I began with a story how my late wife used to write recipes on index cards, her key lime pie, the one she guarded most closely. How she believed kitchens were classrooms and second chances could be baked like bread. I spoke of the Holt Pierce Scholarship for Hospitality named for her, and for the quiet help Elowen had given when things turned. Funds from the villa's sale would go to students who saw more in a menu than prices who could carry a room's warmth the way others carried a tune. Applause swelled warm and unforced. The press cameras clicked without the rush of intrusion. In the back, servers in black moved like shadows replenishing glasses. Only then did I slip the envelope from my pocket. The seal gave with a sigh. Julianne's letter was short, the ink a little uneven. Thank you for telling the truth and showing me another way. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, as if it had been kept in a drawer, meant for things that mattered. Later at home, I took the villa key from the small dish by my desk. The weld was still visible if you looked for it, a line where something had once given way. I placed it in a cedar box, the grain rising under my fingertips, and turned the tiny lock until it clicked. Back in the ballroom, the audience had risen. Their standing ovation was a wave I felt more than heard. I nodded grateful, but in my mind, I was already on my balcony. Salt air threading through the open doors, the muffled ocean breathing just beyond. Some chapters close with noise. Mine closed with a tide steady and sure. That night, as the moonlight pooled over my balcony, I thought of the villa key resting in its cedar box, its small weld catching the lamplight like a quiet badge of survival. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing, but about knowing when to hold on and when to pass something forward. Sometimes a fracture doesn't ruin a thing. It just shows you where the light can enter. For anyone standing in the middle of loss or change, remember, renewal often hides in the most ordinary days. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this journey, feel free to follow along for more.